This panel's on iGaming, and delighted to be joined by the US market share leader and the biggest global supplier. So we're in a good position to be talking about iGaming. I guess when I think about iGaming in the US, it's always, to me, a bit of a conundrum in the sense that already between Michigan, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, we have 3 of the top 5 global regulated markets in terms of size already, despite not being around for very long in any kind of term, although people always refer to New Jersey as a mature market, which I never really understand. But clearly huge markets, and yet when I look at them in lots of ways, it really feels like we're just getting started when we think about product and we think about where this market could go over time. So perhaps as a way of sort of starting, Todd, and start with you. How do you think about the US market and how we've got to this situation? Do you think my sort of start point's a fair one? How do you see it from a sort of global supply perspective, seeing the US?
Yeah, I mean, it's only in a few states, right? And if you think of like a land-based casino and you think like how much allocation you give to the sports book or the poker room, it's quite minor compared to how much you give to slots and tables. And so that's for good reason. The money is over on the casino side, and it's early days. I think about it all from a player perspective, and it's a different market, blackjack centric, and they play a very different kind of slot, which Oliver would know all about, and so we got to kind of get in here and learn a bit, teach a bit, and grow with the market because it's early days. People are seeing online casino for the first time ever, but yeah, I think it's early days.
It's definitely a learning curve. I think obviously coming from the European side of the casino business, the slot player is entirely different to a European slot player. We find the more simpler slot, American players we find need to understand very quickly why they're winning or losing on a slot machine. So 3 real steppers work very well, nice simple kind of line by line stuff. So I've been surprised certainly at the kind of the split of the really big land-based games, the 88 Fortunes, the Cleopatras, etc., how well they perform, but equally how much sort of newer content from Europe resonates on the more simple side of the spectrum. It's so exciting for me because we have the ability to almost educate the American customer to play more complex, arguably more engaging slot machines, and we're seeing that. I mean, when we started here a few years ago in the US, volatility was super low. Players like to win often, but small amounts. They're hungrier for more volatility now. They're hungrier for more of an engaging gambling experience. So the future's bright, and obviously that's only in 4-5 states with Connecticut. This time next year, touch wood, a couple more. This time in 5 years. I mean, geez, it could be a super exciting area for sure.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing to me, and perhaps I'm US-minded in the way I play slots. I always find it baffling if I've won or lost on a game, so perhaps something that too. But that point about education is a really interesting one to me, because I've often heard that people often play and go back to time and time again the game they were originally introduced to or bonused onto, but equally the market clearly does evolve, and we can see that. Even thinking of the last panel on the sports side, there's that push towards different kinds of products and frankly higher margin products, so people sort of thinking those sort of terms. So as an operator, how do you think about the right way to introduce the mix of games and push players or nudge players towards versus letting them find what they want to find? Because that must be a difficult balance.
So finding what a player wants to find or what we think they want to find by virtue of their previous history is really hard on a little 5-inch mobile device. Real estate is an issue. I think we're at a stage now as an industry, particularly in the US, we have 1,500 games live in New Jersey at the moment. That's just too much to expect a player to look at themselves and find what they're looking for. I'm really interested in how we can kind of algorithmically change our lobbies. If we all logged into our Netflix now, we'd have an entirely different offering. If we all logged into BetMGM at the moment, we'd see kind of the same thing, which I think moving that into a place where we can, using predictive analytics based on previous play or previous demographical studies of you as a player or players like you, present content that we feel will resonate with you the most. the majority of our play, just like in the sports world, is from the homepage. And if we have one version of our homepage for 100,000 active players, it's not necessarily the right way to do it. So super excited of working on how to present content using the learnings from us as operators and suppliers to present the right things to the right people at the right time.
An obvious point to ask you, Todd, obviously Evolution changed its lobby pretty dramatically in the recent past. So how do you see that personalization aspect, and what kind of impact did it make when you started moving towards a more recommendation-led lobby structure?
Yeah, it's we did it almost out of necessity because we had so many games that they didn't neatly fit into categories anymore, and so it was high time for us to get sort of adopting AI a bit, and it's just what players expect. I think maybe 5 years ago we talked a lot about, let people personalize the lobby for themselves and do this, but nobody wants to do that. They just want you to figure out what they want and then to put it in front of them. And so that's sort of the model. And we get smarter every day with more and more games. But in the US, we have a much more limited game offering. We have the busiest table in the world is Crazy Time, and we don't offer it in the United States yet. We hope to. But it takes time to build these things, to get them regulated, all that sort of stuff. And there's a wide collection of those games that would normally be used to bring people from the outside to the inside. And those are great conversion tools.
And just to focus on the supply mix point of it. So you've got very popular land-based games. You mentioned a few of them. It's obvious to see, and I know omnichannel is a huge part, or omnichannel, multi-channel, whichever you call it. It's a huge part of the sort of BetMGM approach and leveraging those sort of assets. But you're saying actually some of the maybe simpler European games or global games are sort of also being useful, sort of playing quite well with sort of customers. So how much is the digital native game going to inevitably take over in the coming years, or do you think there'll always be a sort of bedrock of this is the game I play when I visit the Bellagio, or this is, therefore I will always want to play that game?
I think it will reverse in entirety. At the moment, we see the really established land-based suppliers will pick their best performing floor-based games and transition them into online games. Building a land-based game can take 12, 18, 24 months, obviously, to get it on a floor. It takes 3 to 6 months to build an online game. As online establishes itself more as the dominant piece of the puzzle, online games will then lead to land-based versions of those games, because you can test and iterate far more, in my experience, online than offline. So I think we'll see a reversal of that. We'll always see the big titles, the Cleopatras, the 88 Fortunes, soon to be the Buffaloes, as I play that on land-based, I'm going to play that online. But again, it's up to us to position other products that they might like. And it's not if I play a Cleopatra game, I'm going to like all Egyptian-themed games. It's far more underlying than that. It's the math behind the game. That's the reason people stick to it. So using our kind of AI and knowledge to push those games will be really, really valuable. But I think I'm excited to see the switch for land-based suppliers to move from land to online to online to land. Very excited to see that.
There's also this dynamic, too, where someone's logging into BetMGM right now, setting up an account for the first time, and they've never seen Buffalo or Cleopatra, right? I mean, they're starting their gambling journey online, and so it's sort of open field from them. And if they're younger and they grew up playing video games, they might want something a bit more intensive.
And from a supply point of view, do you start at this point creating US-focused product streams? I guess one of the things as a supplier is you want to be amortizing that cost across the widest possible kind of base of demand to make the best return on it. But is the US market, with its size and maybe with the specificity of what players want to see, at the level where you as a supplier want to have a kind of a US-focused games? These are our US games versus our games that would appeal to players in Italy or wherever else.
Yeah, it's just now to the point where I think where we can justify doing sort of US games. And the unfortunate reality of it is a game that you design for the US, it's going to have like a 1/3 of the success in the rest of the world than it would if you were designing a rest of world game. The US is a big market, and we have a lot of games. We're going to do well over 100 games this year. So sort of looking at what's working in the US and sort of shooting right at it. We're giving it some roadmap love.
Okay. And I guess you've already done that to an extent in live. I think of Craps, actually a game I love playing, even though I've never played it in a casino or even seen it in a casino. But you obviously have looked at creating US specific games. Clearly, blackjack is a huge game for the US market. That's globally relevant for you as well. So, can you talk a little bit about where live is in the US versus where you want to be? You mentioned Crazy Time as an example if you haven't got in there, but I guess live is the area I always look at with iGaming where it feels like we haven't necessarily really got started yet, if it not being too blunt about it.
Yeah, so interesting detail. The first game, live game Evolution ever did that performed better in the United States than the rest of the world was Craps. And it's by a pretty good margin, too. So that's kind of a cool statement. And yeah, this is a blackjack-centric market. And blackjack is the most inefficient and costly game to run because you can only fit 7 people on a normal blackjack table. And so it just means more real estate, more people, more training, more hiring, more physical real estate, and that's just a reality. So, and then you have to have studios in every jurisdiction. So, that's what the market wants. You have to cater to it, and we are. But yeah, we think a lot about the U.S. these days.
I think that's probably the hardest thing from your side on the live side more than anything else. At the moment, you have to do everything in triplicate. If you want to build a game, if you want to launch a game in the US, there's no such thing. Obviously, by virtue of everything needs to be in-state in almost all circumstances. It's a gamble to launch a product in the US more than it is perhaps in Europe, where the distribution is so wide. So your choice of games would have to be quite acute, I guess.
Yeah, and then you have to bend the game to satisfy this state's regulations, and you have to bend it back this way to satisfy that state's regulations, and so you end up creating something like another half a game. So you end up losing a piece of your roadmap if you decide that you want to go for the U.S. market. So again, it's costly.
And to what extent are regulators still a friction point? Not necessarily that it's approvals, but pace of approvals is something I hear sort of constantly in the market. How much of a friction point is that still, or is the burden really, as you said, more on it's just a lot of tables, a lot of real estate, a lot of training, a lot of people, which is clearly a big logistical demand in its own way.
You never, as a product guy, you never have enough games in market, right? And so, but I think it's going at a pretty normal pace. I mean, we've got a dozen games, and we've got slots. We're getting our jackpots going. There's talk about, if you can share jackpots and things like that. So it's moving at I think, an expected pace, I'd say.
Each regulator is different. We love them all equally. It takes time. We want everything yesterday, of course. You do, I do. Want everything on site. But I think we've got a well-established process now with all regulators. We dialogue very frequently, daily, with our technical compliance guys. And they're learning, as we're learning. This is a new market for all of us. So yeah, I think we're fine at the moment.
You mentioned jackpots there, Todd. It's something I wanted to bring up. How important are jackpots, or how important do you think they'll be in the US market? Adam mentioned it when we saw him yesterday, so I thought I'd take the opportunity to ask, how do you sort of see the importance of that?
I'd challenge you to walk through a Vegas floor and see a game without a jackpot positioned in a prominent position at the moment. It is the commodity of land-based gaming. For us, we have our own internal wide area progressive system, which sits across some Entain built games, 23 of them. These pay out life-changing amounts every few weeks, $2, $3 million. A player just yesterday bet $1 on one of our slot machines and won $1.3 million. So those kind of life-changing amounts are great for the industry, great PR. As the market evolves and the players get more educated, I wonder how much they'll realize that there's a lot of RTP that goes to the jackpot, obviously, and you lose that from the base game. So will VIP players enjoy those jackpot games as much as the kind of the headline-grabbing, more sort of relaxed players? It's an incredibly important part of every facet of gaming now, though. I think there's a lot of work we can do to make blackjack more engaging with a progressive jackpot, which sits across all of the tables. It's a necessary thing to have. It's a must-have, frankly, in the industry now.
Americans love jackpots more than any other market. It's a fact.
And can those jackpots, is there a point at which they become cross-channel as well as within those products, you mentioned the Entain games, but also clearly there's a huge land-based network you just referred to.
Yeah, IGT are pioneering it at the moment in New Jersey. I'm not sure if you've seen with the Wheel of Fortune Triple Gold Spin Jackpot, which will launch any day now, pending the regulator. I've said that for a few months though, so we'll see. So that's the first jackpot in the state of New Jersey, which the pool can be won by online players on that game or land-based players on the same game. So that's very exciting to me. And then obviously the most exciting is interstate jackpots, how those can cross state lines potentially at some point, obviously with reciprocal deals between the individual regulators. So you could have genuinely life-changing amounts of money, lottery-style jackpots across every game on our casino floors or on our online offerings. Very excited about that, and we'll certainly be championing that.
You mentioned a second ago about your, I think you said 32 Entain.
23.
23. I got the numbers the wrong way around then. 23 Entain games. It's quite common for large operators to have in-house studios. We've got one of them sponsoring our water. How important is having either an element of in-house or over time more in-house? How do you look at the balance there between the differentiation it provides and the other kind of balance of considerations?
It's important to a point. In-house studios across the industry are very good at making, blackjack. The math is established, an RNG version of blackjack. We can all do that pretty easily with some nice graphics. Slots is more like alchemy, right? No one knows where the next big slot is going to hit, and if we're trying to produce the next big slot internally with our sort of relatively small distribution relative to a supplier that can offer it to the entire market, I think the risk on ROI is quite high there. So it plays an important part. Obviously, it's free from a revenue share perspective for us, so our finance guys love it. But certainly, for the time being and for the future, our reliance and partnerships with third-party suppliers will always be the largest commodity for us. And it's up to us to work with them using our more holistic knowledge of the player to build the next big thing. I think we'd be getting too big for our boots if we thought, look, we internally were going to build the next big thing.
And do you find, Todd, that that's an evergreen debate? I guess you're more on the product side and the commercial side, but do you think that's more of a theme than it was, or less, or always kind of in the background? Do you see any major changes in terms of appetite from operators in terms of what they want to take and from who?
No, it's been around for a while. I don't think it's anything new. I think it's pretty natural. Retailers sell groceries. They think about how they can bring in-house brands and sort of save that bit of margin. But it's a pretty good bargain to be able to choose from. Say we'll make 100 games this year, and he can say I like 6 of them, and I'm going to give those the positioning, and 94 of them you guys can keep, and it's a pretty good bargain. And it's also hard, like I was saying earlier, to justify making games just for the United States. That's for all markets in the United States. We just kind of got to the point where we can justify it, and so. If you're doing it just for one casino, BetMGM is huge, so they can probably pull it off more easily than others. But if you want to be making top-tier games, the economics don't work that well because the hit rates are so low. Mm-hmm. The games just evaporate into space, and after a few days, it's great to have hits. It's great to have a Coca-Cola.
It is. I mean, we're offered, even now in the US, far more in Europe, we can launch 100 new games a week across our states, which is arguably too many for players to enjoy. So I think we're moving now as an operator from a point of this mic is dying. Sorry, a point of sort of collection of games to creating our own content. We play every single game which goes onto our site. Our team evaluate them qualitatively, and then we decide what goes on our site. So. Yeah, it's a numbers game, and we rely on suppliers consistently innovating, obviously, because the hits will come from them more than they'll come from us.
Yeah, and I would say that as long as we're talking slots, I'm saying it's fine. Make a couple games. Make it 5% of your games, whatever. If we're talking live casino, then it's just a nightmare. You do not want to go into live casino with any bankroll almost. It's so different from your normal business, and so hard and so challenging. And just like Evolution doesn't want to start building our own cameras or something like that, we'll just let Canon do that, and we'll buy them from them. It's hard space.
To what extent as well with, as you said, these games can sometimes have a very short life cycle, sort of shockingly short life cycle when you look at the stats on some of them. And as you say, it's sort of an alchemy. Suddenly one hits, and it's sort of thing there. To what extent do you need games to be across multiple operators to create the notoriety, the marketing, the buzz? Because that's always a debate that comes up as well in terms of how does a game kick on and mature?
There's such a sharp tail on the majority of content. There is. So the constant need to produce new content is always there. Again, quality over quantity, I think, for us is the main mission. It's hard, obviously, because everyone wants that real estate of your front page. So a lot of people think that the more content they push out, the more real estate you get on that homepage. But it's not necessarily the case. I think, again, quality over quantity. So we're going to work with all of our suppliers to use our learnings from games that do succeed and try and steer them in perhaps the more directions that would suit our player needs. There's a big commodity in the US, more so than in Europe now, of exclusive content. Obviously, we're in a very privileged position to be the market leader, so we're offered quite a lot of games that are exclusive to us for a time, and then it's released to the wider market a month or so after. It's important to have those exclusivities. Our competitors are just a click away instead of walking or driving to another casino, so it's really important that we have kind of the market first launches for stuff. But then we kind of get a double hit because we launch it first, we push the hell out of it, it then comes onto the wider market, so players see it advertised elsewhere, and then we get that second bump. So I think it's important for large content suppliers to have that wide distribution, but obviously more than happy to take as much exclusive content as I can, because that's a great corner of the market to have.
We're also adopting a slot strategy that allows us to make a lot more bespoke games. So if MGM wants a game that's just for them, with their symbols, with their everything, that we can say yes to that increasingly more often.
How do you deal with that challenge in live? As you say, it's a bit of a different beast.
In live, we don't do it. It's too expensive.
The way we differentiate ourselves in live is creating our own bespoke studios within the Evolution world. So
exactly.
I'll always ask Todd, I've asked him for 6 years or so, give me exclusive games. That's not the way. The economics don't exist there, but I can replicate the MGM Vegas experience within a private studio. So the games are the same, but the experiences are slightly different. We might train the dealers to understand more about the MGM brand so they can speak to our players like we speak to our players. I've got a 7-foot gold lion in the studio, which obviously suits the brand. So that's how we differentiate in the live space.
Yeah, they can run their own bonuses. They talk about their own upcoming events. That's the big story.
Okay. And in terms of the demand you see for live, Ollie, in terms of it feels like the market's a bit capacity constrained at the moment as everyone's trying to build out as quick as they can. Do you think that that live should get to a comparable level to where it is in other European markets? Do you think it could be bigger for some reason, or do you think it'll be structurally smaller? How do you see the kind of future of where it gets to in terms of the shape of your business?
On paper, and everything we know about the American gambling psyche, it should far exceed the European sort of split share of wallet of casino income, because more inherently, American players are far more sociable. Gambling is part of kind of a pastime. So that kind of experience of playing with real humans, chatting to other people, virtual high fives on the table, it should far exceed, and we've got huge expectations for live. There are obviously the drawbacks of having to build everything in every state, which, touch wood, one day will go away, certainly for the major states, and we can build central hubs where Evolution can serve to multiple states at the same time. But we find it incredibly engaging for our players, particularly as a sports-led brand like our other two closest competitors are. It's far easier to sell a NFL punter to a live blackjack game he can play with his friends, than perhaps to a slot machine which doesn't resonate with what he enjoys. So yeah, I've got huge hopes for it, and obviously we'll continue to champion it. Live dealer is one of the only kind of product verticals we have with a dedicated tab, custom promotions. Obviously we invest a lot in our private studios in each state, and we're continually adding tables based on volume. So yeah, high hopes. This is certainly just the beginning for live.
And how do you sort of see that side of it, Todd, and particularly in terms of how important is the social element within live to drive it, and is there sort of a point of, you know, player numbers or liquidity where it starts to then become a bit self-perpetuating? Like how important is that social aspect to live games in general?
Yeah, it's different for different players. So if you're betting more money, you like to be alone. That's just how it's always worked. Blackjack players like fewer people at the table. Over on game shows, things like that, I think the social element is very real. There's a lot of chat. And social works two ways, player to player in chat, and then also player to dealer. And so I think, you know, that's the central thing. You hear people talk about social casino, but there's nothing really that social about it. You're just playing slots by yourself. Whereas this actually is social casino. But for real money, of course. And I think it's pretty important for maybe 65% of the players, and 35%. You know, they prefer something maybe more solitary, and you have to cater to all.
Yeah, it's interesting. And is there a point at which games start sort of perpetuating because they've got enough? I don't know. Is there a point where the chat becomes too busy, or can it never be busy enough in terms of providing that collective experience? And how do you try and get that into the game?
Yeah, it gets to everything. It gets too busy, so it streams too fast. It gets too toxic. It gets too many different languages being in there. It gets to everything, and we have chat moderation. We try to break chat into different languages so people will see more things in their language. The instant translation stuff just isn't there. People don't spell well enough, and we will get there that it'll all be in your language. But no, chat is you learn a lot in chat, a lot about humanity.
I'm going to offer a chance to anyone for the floor to ask a question in a sec. But in terms of challenges, one other aspect I did want to cover was about. You mentioned moderating chat and sort of the requirements on that side. What about the requirements in terms of fraud or protecting RTPs ultimately, or protecting the integrity of the games? How major is that challenge for an operator? For a supplier.
For an operator,
for a supplier, sorry.
Oh, it's paramount. I mean, live casino is way harder. You have marked cards, you have false shuffles, you have every kind of thing you can imagine. And you have players that can track the shuffles using software. And if the shuffle isn't done perfectly tight, they'll know where the aces are coming. You have, there's so many challenges. And you have to invest very big. And in this game, and the bets are much higher too. So on slots, you have pretty low maximum bets. High jackpots, but low max bets. Whereas in blackjack, baccarat, you can get real money down. And so I think it's the most misunderstood part of live casino. And any casino operator would tell you the same thing. Like, you go to Caesar's Palace or something, and they would be very quick to mention how much game protection is where it lives. I mean, it's a huge piece of the business. And there are scams happening right now in live casinos everywhere, I assure you.
It's a huge part of our business. One of our largest departments, obviously, is our risk and fraud department. We rely on the expertise and the knowledge of suppliers to be at the forefront of kind of pre-preventing, I guess, sort of new fraud rings and other things like that. But obviously, we analyze with the help of our suppliers every single large win, any play that looks out of hand and stuff. Of course, it's hugely important. I think as an industry, though, compared to our counterparts on the land-based side, we have such a wealth of data that the way we can mitigate against fraud and risk is the options are myriad. I think whenever we talk to a land-based operator, the power of what we can do. We know every click, we know every position, so far more than them, although it's still a huge challenge, but we're slightly ahead of the curve compared to our land-based counterparts.
If you walk into a casino in Las Vegas and you use your iPhone to track the cards on a blackjack game, you go to prison. It's against the law to use an electronic device to track the cards and can then count cards. Every player online can do it.
Yeah.
Are there any questions on the floor? There is a mic if anyone wants to ask any questions. We've got one in the middle.
Hi everyone, nice to see you and thank you for the panel. I enjoyed it very much. I'm Ido Haitin, Playtech Live CEO. I just wanted to ask, the session is called Building the Best iGaming Portfolio or iGaming Offering. As you know, I was originally invited to participate in the panel and then mysteriously, not mysteriously, was requested not to participate. Don't you think that such a move limits the value of the audience here in the same way that other moves similar to that limits the value of the players and of operators in the market, limiting the offering and the value given to players, to operators? I hear about bespoke games, for example. I personally run a very successful bespoke game with the Entain group called Well, Well, Well. I'm sure that you know it. The model is very successful behind it, and us being one industry trying to contribute to each other or just building a better market for the American player, don't you think that such an approach by one of the players in the market limits the value of everyone investing in the market? Thank you.
Thanks for that. I mean, perhaps there's a bit more to discuss afterwards. I mean, the point of the panel is to talk about some of the themes in here. And I don't think anyone at any point suggesting that having a variety of suppliers isn't important. I think that's something that Ollie's made very clear during it. In terms of the panel composition, it's done by the iGaming Next team, so perhaps that's something you can follow up with them. But I think the general point you're making that the diversity of suppliers is important is clearly an absolutely valid and important one.
So I'm curious about how you guys are viewing second screen experiences as they pertain to, I guess, live broadcasting and iGaming in general. Is that something that you guys are looking at, and how are you looking at it as it pertains to, 1, partnerships, 2, compliance, and then 3, long-term innovation?
We see in the data how much of the business comes through Apple TV, and it's increasingly growing. It's cool. I think we don't build anything necessarily bespoke for the second screen experience or anything like that at the moment. We did a VR game. I think we got about 4 players a day that play on it, and but we got to learn a lot. But for now, we're just relying on the good work of Apple and Samsung that allow you to sort of screencast it. And I think it's a very popular way to play. I think people really get a big kick out of it.
Yeah, I don't have any data on how many players play our games. Obviously, it's very much mobile first. Probably sort of 80-90% of our business now is mobile, certainly iOS-led. Would always be very excited to speak to suppliers about how we can sort of innovate in that space. VR feels still like a novelty, that kind of space. So other areas would be very excited. If we can chat later, definitely. It sounds like you've got something quite interesting. So, but yeah. Always looking to innovate.
We're right up on time. Is there anything else on the floor, anyone? No? Well, thanks very much, Todd. Ollie, thanks very much for being on the panel.
Thanks, buddy.